Hello and welcome to another Cram Sesh here on Push Your Glasses Up. I'm Mikey. Today we're going to be going over Toy Stories 1, 2, 3, and 4 with returning guest and old pal of mine, Mike Newcomb. We're doing this leading into the next episode of the show, which will be the Lightyear conversation. He'll be back for that as well. Real quick, if you have been enjoying these podcasts or the trailer reactions, hey, do me a favor on the YouTube channel. Like the videos, subscribe to the channel. It is very cool that people have been doing that more often lately, and I appreciate it a great deal. If you prefer not to look at my face, it's a little hurtful, but you got to do what you got to do. We have the podcast on audio only format, and it's on most podcast services, so you could go about it that way. But now, let's get to all these Toy Stories. Mike, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mikey.
This Doctor. Yeah, so we're going to talk about all of these Toy Stories. All
of these Toy Stories. There's 4 of them.
Toy Story. Yes, okay.
Toy Stories.
Yeah, we're not going to worry about all the side short things.
No. There's also a lot of those apparently too that I did not. Yeah,
we're not going to worry about Partysaurus Rex or anything like that. That's fine.
Right, or the Halloween specials,
which are
or
good.
The video game spin-offs.
The
Halloween
good,
special, yeah.
But
all the spin-offs are good. I've had an opportunity to watch a couple of those with my son. I managed to watch all of these with my son. Somehow managed to have a toddler sit through a movie, which I think is also an achievement unto itself.
Yes. It helps that they are not very long.
No, especially the first one. I was kind of amazed, right? Because I think we had talked about this before of just like, wow, Toy Story 1 came out in 1996? 1995.
Yep.
Oh my God. Coming up on 30 years ago.
And
we're old, I guess.
And I already know that. Don't worry about that. But yeah, the real quick before we jump into the movie, you started talking about watching it with your son. But what is this is kind of a ubiquitous thing because I think we all saw it when we were kids. But like, what is your history with the franchise in general and the first movie?
Well, I mean, the first movie, God, I don't even know if I can dig that deep right at this point. I remember seeing it in theaters, and I think at the time I probably had a similar reaction to that mirrors a lot of people's reactions, which is this looks amazing. Like I've never seen an animated film look like this before in my life, look this good, ever. And I always remember America's Dad being in the movie, being Tom Hanks. I always remember hearing Tim Allen because Home Improvement was huge at the time, right? Like hearing those two voices in there, like blew my mind.
Guarantee that's the only reason he was in it. I mean, it worked, probably. But I guarantee that's why it happened.
I totally agree. And so
after he ratted out his cocaine friends.
Yeah, right.
Done doing that.
He was trying to ride the high a little differently. For sure.
Chasing a different dragon.
And so I remember seeing that movie. I was maybe 11 or 12 based on 1995. So it's probably like 11. And
I was 10.
You were 10. So it's kind of wild to think back because, when you're 11 or 12, you're kind of at that knife edge of just being like, I'm older now, like I don't look at little kid stuff. I don't watch cartoons anymore, except you still totally do. And
you don't tell people you do.
You don't tell people about it though. And so, you go from there, and then Toy Story 2, I think, came out several years later. I remember being a teenager when Toy Story 2 came out. I didn't see it for the first time until...
Toy Story 2 was 98?
I think 98. Okay. So I would have been a teenager, a young teenager.
I want to double check myself on that, but continue.
And so in any case, you're it's a little differently. I don't think I went to see it in theaters. Because of the aforementioned 1999. Okay. So I was 15, 16. And so, you don't go to see a movie like that in theaters when you're a teenager. And so I remember seeing it at home at like some family party. One of my cousins had brought it over who was younger, and we watched it, and I really liked it. I thought it was a good story. I started to pick up on more of the voices like Kelsey Grammer and Joan Cusack being in the cast. But then I think once you look at Toy Story 3 and 4, the gap between those movies is so significant and I hadn't really gotten a chance to see them. I think I watched Toy Story 3 like not that long ago, maybe within the last few years. Obviously, I rewatched all of them recently, but
it was, so that was 2010 when that came out.
That was 2010. Yeah. So I don't even think I watched it until like maybe 2 or 3 years ago, tops.
Yeah.
And then Toy Story 4, I watched honestly just for this, because I hadn't gotten a chance to watch it. And it's not for nothing, but
we'll get there. We'll get there. That's the last one on the book. Yeah.
That's my history with the movies, though, I guess, is the first one kind of blew my mind, was incredible to watch. I also think it's worth touching on, and maybe we'll get to it, but just this idea of like watching the fourth one, but then also looking back at the first one in 2022 is insane.
And the irony of you saying like,
this is amazing.
It's better than anything has ever looked.
Right.
Well, that's your history with the franchise is pretty similar to mine. I saw the first one in theaters. The second one, I was in that same age bracket of like, I don't see Disney now, which was stupid because I still loved it and would still get the VHS tapes in the oversized plastic cartons, clamshell carton things. And that is like Aladdin and the first Toy Story are the two, like those Disney bubble VHS packages that I like.
Oh yeah.
I tactically remember how they feel even. But yeah, the first movie I saw in theaters, the second I didn't see in theaters, but I saw it on VHS after it came out. The third movie, that was back when I was like adult enough to be like, no, there's no reason to not see these. They're good movies. So that I did actually see in theaters with like all of my roommates at the time. I mean, it was 2010, so I was like mid 20s, and we all just went and had a good time at the movies, and all sobbed. But and then I happened to be managing at a movie theater when 4 came out, and the amount of times that I was like, oh my god, it's over already, we gotta go clean the theater. But yeah, I was shocked at how short that movie was. But yeah,
efficient.
Yeah, and I think that like overall, like the standard on a Pixar movie is high, and it started with the first
are high
movie
too from people at this point.
Yeah, and now we can get into like talking about each movie individually now. Like the first movie, I think it set that standard really high, but it shows its age both in how simplistic it is story wise, and also like it looks like a PS2 game. Like it's hard to actually visually watch this movie now. With like a 4K HDR system, it just doesn't. It doesn't come forward, and that is sort of what I was saying. The irony of you saying like how it was mind blowing at the time, like it was, but it was a short term mind blow because we. Like the 2D animation at the time, like I would say, like the Lion King that uses a little bit of CG, and like there's a little bit of CG in Beauty and the Beast with like the room they're dancing in and whatnot. I think that was at the peak of that art form. So that actually, like, even though that's the old way of doing things, that translates to a much more timeless look. And because it was such an infant stage of how this art form was going, like Toy Story 1 looks bad now, man.
It does, you know. And it's amazing too, because you put that in context of all of the kind of like technological innovations they had to make that movie become what it was. Yeah. And how that effectively laid the foundation for, I feel like, that entire type of like movie, like the digital animation movie from that point forward, I feel like started with that film and set the bar for every other film studio. This is what y'all have to bring to the table now, because this is the future, I think is kind of what they were saying. Because
what you're saying is without Toy Story, we'd never get Shrek.
We never get Shrek. You know, we never get How to Train Your Dragon.
That would be more upsetting. That would be far more upsetting. I love those movies.
And so I do actually think that, though. I think it really helped set the foundation for kind of every other film to build off of, because it set the expectation for audience interest, and it set the expectation for kind of like what other film studios should be doing to kind of stay up, you know, to stay modern in terms of how not only just the way you tell stories, but like the modalities you choose to tell them in. So I think it was like a really important film that had to be made. And, all the people involved have since made other, good movies. Because I think Andrew Stanton was like one of the writers for the first film, right?
One of the Coen brothers was a writer on this movie.
Oh, right. You're
Joel
right. I forgot about that.
And
Joel Coen helped write it.
There's also a lot of bad people that worked on this first movie.
Yes,
Joss Whedon was also one of the writers. John Lasseter directed it and many of the early stage Pixar stuff, and he's not a great guy either. So there is a lot of like also bad history with Pixar as well as like groundbreaking and like boundary pushing for the whole industry as they were. Like it definitely came with some real bad downfalls as well. But like, on top of that, like interpersonal aspect of it, it also came with the downfall of like, shit, nobody's doing 2D animation anymore. Like high quality 2D animation. Like people were still doing 2D animation, but not on like a theatrical level anymore. We were getting like strong bad.
Like, right. We're getting strong bad like Flash animation. But did Disney made like one other 2D animation after like the Princess and the Frog? I think came after this, right?
They made a couple. They made Home
Princess
on the
and the
Range.
Frog was one of them. Yes. Okay.
About farm animals, which is not a great movie. Princess and the Frog.
Great movie.
Ooh, so good. That is such a good movie.
Great soundtrack.
Yes, and I'm so glad that they are changing Splash Mountain over to that.
Oh, that's right. I heard that recently too. That's fun.
Instead of the automatically tied to racism things that the original ride theme was.
Oh my God.
Yeah. The fact that it was the 90s and they were like, yeah, Song of the South, let's go.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But
so to come back to like the first movie though, and kind of the technological innovations that it made and some of the careers, for better and worse that it set up, especially, with Andrew Stanton, who went on to make like a number of Pixar films or direct a number of Pixar films that I think are some of the best Pixar films some of my favorites. Finding Nemo. I think he did WALL-E. He did John Carter of Mars, which I think is a pretty underrated sci-fi movie,
live action movie. He did John Carter, and yes, they did specifically just John Carter. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Andrew Stanton also did. Oh no! I was about to confuse him with the Iron Giant director, right? Because that's not the same person.
No, that's a different.
Because I was going to say Ghost Protocol, but that's Brad Bird.
Yes, Brad Bird did the Iron Giant. Yes.
Yeah. But Andrew Stanton, though, I mean, he's great. And so I remember seeing his name in retrospect now, like as an adult, being a fan of all those other Pixar movies, really liking John Carter of Mars, which my wife likes to meme about because I'm like such a hard defender of that movie.
It's a good movie.
So I was like, oh my God.
It's not like the greatest movie of all time. It's a very good pulp movie.
It's a really solid like fantasy sci-fi pulp movie for sure.
But in any case, we'll get to Lightyear on the next episode, but like honestly, it's the same style of movie as that. I won't say they're on the same level or anything like that, but like it's the same general style of like throwback old school sci-fi pulp stuff.
Yeah. And so it's interesting to think about like the simplistic nature of the story because it is just like so easily accessible. Like either from having watched it multiple times throughout my life, I was just kind of easy, and then now watching with my son and kind of seeing if he's like tracking it, it's difficult to say, but if he sits and watches the whole movie, then I consider that an achievement, to be honest, that they must have done something right to entertain a 2-year-old for that long. And so he'll sit and watch the whole movie without really getting up and wandering around too much. But I think, it still has good themes, and it was cool to see how from Toy Story 1 to Toy Story 4, they still found different ways to explore that theme through introducing kind of more and more antagonists as the movies kind of went on. Because the first one, in theory, you could say maybe Sid is an antagonist. I don't really think he counts in my book. I don't think the first movie really has a clear-cut antagonist in the same way that other movies do.
Yeah, it's a story about a rock and a hard place. It's two opposing forces that are main characters, as opposed to like having a quote unquote villain. Guy. Yeah, Sid is an antagonistic force, but not. He's not a main villain. Yeah,
right.
He's not the antagonist.
Yeah, and so I think as a result, like they found a good way by introducing kind of more kind of opposing forces, more kind of direct antagonists into the movie, to help explore the theme. Because one of the themes that I feel like came up for me in all of the movies, and it obviously starts in Toy Story 1, is just this idea of being left behind. And that's why it like resonates so clearly with me to think about it in context of like the rest of the movies, because they they kind of find different ways to look at what that means.
Yeah.
And the insecurity that creates, and being on the outs and being on the out group, and I don't know, there's just a lot of what this movie does to kind of talk about that through toys.
Yeah.
Which is still sorry, I'm still getting over a cold, but the thing that always kind of still, like, now as an adult, I have to look at it with like that kind of like in universe, like critical brain of and this is so silly, Mikey, so I'm sorry for putting the question out there. So Buzz Lightyear in Toy Story 1 thinks he is Buzz Lightyear, right? He is Buzz Lightyear. He's not the toy based on the movie based on Buzz Lightyear. Right? So he is Buzz Lightyear. So toys, whenever a human enters the room, they all freeze. No, they know this because they warn about it. Andy's coming, everybody freeze, go back to your places, blah blah blah. They all have this thing. Buzz, right out of the gate, even though he thinks he's Buzz Lightyear, knows how to do that. And so as I was watching that movie to refresh myself, I was like, how does...
Wait, does he? Because I think they have to...
he freezes, doesn't he?
I think they have to convince him to, like...
The first time?
Yeah.
Maybe that's it. Because otherwise I was like, how does he know how to freeze in place every single time?
There's headcanon stuff that you can also, like, go through of, like, all right, off camera, they told him... Because at one point he calls Andy, like, their god. And so, like, at one point, they could have just been, like, in a moment of, like, not wanting to deal with his bullshit anymore. Right. They could have just been like... Yeah, he just doesn't like us moving. You gotta, like, whatever.
You gotta stand still when he's around.
Yeah. But those are those, like, the things that I mentioned of, like, when this sort of format of this animation genre came to be, like, this is not just the first full-length CG movie. This is Pixar's first full-length movie. This is them finding their footing, and, like, there's stuff that, like, you could probably nitpick a lot of those things, and that's where I say, like, that this is them in their infancy in both the technology and them figuring out storytelling
and telling stories. Yeah,
because it is like, it's a thin movie. It's a real thin movie. I think
there's some
Toy Story
things
2,
that definitely just hold on.
Yeah, and Toy Story 2, I think, has, like, there's an emotional pull in this movie, of course, but, like, Toy Story 2 is when you get to, like, oh, this is what Pixar does now. Because, like, it's more of just a fun adventure on the first movie, and that's, like, I think where it shows its age the most, and that it's like outside of the actual, like, the textures aren't great, that kind of thing. But storytelling, I think that's where it shows its age the most, and it's sort of just like, yeah, this is like an old style movie that this is a kid's movie.
Yeah.
Whereas, like,
I think that's fair.
2, you get that Pixar, like, it's made for everybody. It has those, like, adult jokes that are hidden in there too, but, like, Toy Story 2 on an emotional level is where you get to that, like, all right, this is just a movie. It happens to be animation. It's not just a quote unquote kids movie, which I make sure I put in quotes, because I do hate that being used as a derogatory for movies, because, like, movies made for small children sometimes can't be fucking Blade Runner, man.
I like the category that I see on a lot of streaming services now as a parent, that's called family, because it implies that you could watch this by yourself, you could watch this with your kid, and everyone's going to have a good time. You'll both maybe take away different things from it.
I'm sure you are well versed in it now, but the category basically summing up Bluey, which is a 10 out of 10 kid show. Everybody check it out.
So me and my son love that show, even though I feel like
I think Bandit, every adult likes it more than the kids.
A lot of adults, like, there's a subreddit where I feel like a lot of people get banned from because they take the show a little too seriously as adults. And it's like, yo, this is still a show for kids and families, and you can watch it and be entertained by it. But like, I feel like you're looking a little too deeply into it.
Like I have a nephew of roughly the same age as your kid. So I have watched an episode or two, but I'm not going to be like, all right, I have to write a whole essay about Bluey. It's going to be 5,000 words about the mortality of man. And ironically, though, as we kind of verge into Toy Story 2, I think this is where you start getting those, well, like we were saying, the more adult sort of tone as far as like covering more emotional value.
Yeah, big time.
And some of this other stuff I'm about to mention does come in the first movie. It just comes in much stronger with this. Like, this is also after A Bug's Life, so they've had
that is in between this.
Yeah, so they've had another chance to kind of figure themselves out, and I think they do find a little bit more growth in storytelling. Although I think that is a mid-level kind of entry for them overall at Pixar, but it did give them a little bit more of a chance to stretch their legs and try a different kind of story out before going back to Toy Story, which also wasn't even supposed to be Pixar in the first place. That was going to be a Disney Toon movie, and it was going to be straight to video and blah, blah. Whole history lesson on that if you want to go watch it. But I think the notes of existentialism that come with that Left Behind story that are touched on in the first movie is the main focus moving forward from 2. And we get to different points of that realization through the franchise. Like in 4, it's more about Woody knowing what that feels like now and wanting to make sure nobody gets left behind. But that is where we'll get to in a little bit. But like 2, Jessie's story, man, is one of the and it's only like that actual section of her story is really only from like 2/3 into the movie to the end, and it is heartbreaking, and a lot of that comes with the help of Sarah McLachlan singing. But
she's good at making people cry now for 2 reasons: commercials about dogs and Jessie's story.
And also in our age group, middle school slideshows when we were graduating from middle school into high school, it was that and the one Green Day song that was an acoustic song. So
every single time, the time of my life. Oh God. But yeah, the second one was interesting because, you know, I probably hadn't watched it as much as the first one, but I definitely have seen it more than a dozen times at this point in my life. And, you know, like I was saying earlier, like that's where they also start to introduce like a little bit more kind of direct antagonist to kind of like move the story along. You know, I don't remember his name, the guy who runs the toy barn, played by Al Newman. Yes, Al's Toy Barn. Thank you. So the guy, you know, he kind of acts as like an initial force.
Real name, Wayne Knight.
Yeah, Wayne Knight. Thank you.
Also from Jurassic Park.
Yes. And Space Jam.
Also Space Jam. I was going to say Fatal Attraction.
He's in Fatal Attraction? Oh my God.
He's in the room when Sharon Stone does the leg crossing thing.
Does the famous leg crossing thing.
He's sweating bullets in that one.
Oh my God. Yeah. And so he plays like kind of a direct antagonist. They also have Kelsey Grammer's character for Minor Pete, or Stinky Pete. Is that his character name?
He's the prospector.
Stinky Pete.
And the meta is that in the Woody's Roundup TV show, they refer to a Stinky Pete all the time. And then when the prospector is getting in the way of like everybody being happy and stuff, he calls him the real Stinky Pete. But he's not technically Stinky Pete, I don't think. I think he's actually just the prospector, but yeah, it's
right. That line where like, I love Joan Cusack's performance as this character.
Cusack, because I think outdoes anybody else in these movies.
Yeah, she's amazing, and she brings such a huge amount of energy to her voice and her performance. And so like that line where she's like, the prospector, he's gonna want it, like just like the excitement she has, like it just really works for that character so well. And so
you're more prone to make your way to Disneyland, which they do have Jesse's Critter Carousel there at California Adventure. You need to plan a trip that like some of your family or something could meet you at Walt Disney World
in Florida.
Because they're still on the East Coast, right?
Oh yeah. Well, we still want to go, even though California Disney is about 3 hours, 2.5, 3 hours south of us.
It's almost just as long just to fly to the other one.
We just want to. In Florida Disney is kind of like, in my opinion, like a lot like better. There's just more stuff.
Well,
the parks are bigger. There's more space.
Disneyland has a nostalgia that we never experienced, but we still feel when we go to it. And Walt Disney World is actually being transported into this whole other place. So it's a different vibe.
There's definitely an appeal to that. But I mean, and so, you have the prospector kind of being maybe the kind of fulfillment of what happens to a character.
I sidelined that whole conversation. Didn't even say why.
Right.
The Slinky Dog Dash roller coaster has like a 30-foot Jesse, just like yipping and hollering. It's fantastic. It's amazing.
Rest in peace, Jim Varney.
Continue.
So so the prospector kind of acts as like that representation of what happens to somebody that has like really let the kind of negative effects of being left behind get to them, to the point where they'll do anything to kind of ensure that other people have the same fate as them, to be truly left behind. Yeah.
The prospector doesn't want student loan forgiveness because he had to pay his loans.
He had to be. Oh man, what a boomer. So
it is Kelsey Grammer.
It is Kelsey Grammer.
The age is right.
And so it's interesting to kind of like see that, because that kind of continues on a little bit, like that same idea of like, well, I was left behind, so I'm going to bring everybody down with me.
3 has a similar
thing, although wait till we get to that, because I was like reading about that one. That one's insane.
Yeah.
And then Toy Story 4 has a similar feel too. It's explored a little differently, from like, what does it mean to kind of be left behind or just kind of ignored. So yeah, it's interesting to kind of see all of those different kind of factors come together in 2. But I do really like this movie. I think, it puts more of the focus on Buzz being kind of more what's the word? Not self-actualized to a degree, of like that he's a toy and that he is not Buzz Lightyear. And so he has a little more awareness, I think, of that in the second movie. So he has to be an actual character, and not like this kind of like, I am Buzz Lightyear. I am a, he's not I'm a fictional character.
Yeah, he's not the unknowing foil anymore.
Yeah, he gets to actually be a character. And the supporting cast in all of the Toy Story movies, by the way, that is in all of these, like I said, rest in peace, Jim Varney.
Don Rickles, Don
Rickles, yeah. It's been a while now, so a lot of the actors have passed away. Yeah. I know Jim Varney was only
alive. I was just going through more people. But
Jim Varney's only in the first one, though, I think, right? And then I think he passed away before the second one.
I think he's in 1 and 2.
Okay.
Yeah. And then actually, the voice actor, I forget his name off the top of my head, but the voice actor that replaced him was his good friend, but he was on Home Improvement with Tim Allen.
I just remember him from like all the Adam Sandler movies.
Yes,
I can't remember his name though.
Yeah, he was like the hillbilly guy in
Waterboy.
Yeah, but he also was. I think a lot of people would know him, I think, as Sean's dad on Boy Meets World. Who's like, his dad wasn't really there, but he was there for a few episodes, like pretending to kind of care about the family again or something. And
because his dad was like a deadbeat. Yeah, that's wild.
But it's a guy that always talks like this anyway, so they just put him in. Yeah.
He's got a crazy voice. Wallace Shawn also as the T-Rex. He kind of persisted. Eventually, they in the subsequent movies they got even more kind of recognizable voices, I feel. But yeah, it still like holds up as a story, and you can tell kind of this additional thing where it's like, now they've had a couple movies under their belt. They're telling stories with like a lot more emotion, like you had said. They're telling stories that are meant to try to reach that place for people as well, to reach that emotional place for people.
But then on top of that too, like there is, when you revisit these back to back now, they are actually, like, you would think about it and be like, oh, they're only 4 years apart, so it looks the same as the first movie. No, this movie is like leaps and bounds visually better. Like, it's not Toy Story 3 levels yet, but like that was another 10 years forward after that, 11 years forward. So like it was still kind of shocking to me to watch them back to back, because I don't think I've ever watched them back to back like that. And to actually be like, oh, we have literally gone from like a PS2 game up to like maybe last generation almost. Like it's what would have been the leap in video games of like almost 20 years. It actually did that in about 4.
It's amazing. And I think, again, it's like a testament to them kind of creating a lot of the technology for the first movie that just set them up to kind of innovate further and further, because now, with each subsequent Pixar release, like, I think, I don't know if necessarily a lot of people are putting this expectation on Pixar, but I certainly have the expectation of like, this movie is going to look amazing, because every movie that's ever come out, I'm like, it can't, I've kind of stopped saying it can't look any better than the last one, because I know it will, because they continually seem to push themselves and find new ways to animate, new ways to kind of tell stories. And so this movie, I think, is,
once we get to the next episode with Lightyear, we'll talk about like how the animation has literally changed and they've gone back to a more traditional look for it. It's not trying to get hyper realism anymore, which I appreciate. But I know those are the steps they had to take in the realism of computer animation. So,
sure,
whatever.
But so, I mean, I think the second movie is a really kind of, I feel like if you had ever, like, let's say if like you had told me that there was only ever 2 movies, then I feel like that would have also felt sufficient to me. But then you get to the third one, and the third one does have like a really kind of insane emotional arc that I feel like hits everybody in the heartstrings towards the end, which we haven't really gotten into the third movie yet.
Yeah, but we can go into the third movie, because the last thing I would just want to say about the second movie is that, like, I think the third movie is the best movie of these initial 3 movies. I mean, of all the Toy Story movies, it is. But like, it's, I don't know if it actually has the sadness that comes with the second movie, because there is sadness in it, but like, it's a welcomed sadness of like knowing that you and somebody have grown apart and you're saying goodbye on good terms, kind of thing. Like, it's that kind of situation, as opposed to 2, which is just like, there's an ultimate happy ending to it, but like the actual lows in this movie are just gut wrenching. So like,
oh my God,
I think that they sort of course corrected on that with 3 and 4, but like still hitting lows in a different way that like almost course corrected in the wrong way of like, now we'll get into the third movie where they accept their deaths.
that scene, I think, is the one that like really screws with everybody watching it. They're going into a pit, into effectively a furnace, right? And like, they're holding hands, they're closing their eyes, and like, you don't think that Disney's going to do that. Like, they're going to pull their punch at the last second. They're going to let you buy into the fact that they might actually drop them into the furnace.
Let me double check timing, because I think it's still an independent production from Pixar.
Oh,
I think this is before they were bought.
Before they, I was going to say.
So let me double check that, because that is. I mean, obviously they were bought in a different way by the fact that they started out as a Lucasfilm company.
Right.
But oh boy, I accidentally went to their list of films. That's not what I wanted to do. All right. Pixar was bought by Disney. Oh no, it's after.
It's after.
2006 is when they were bought.
Okay, so it's shortly after.
Yeah, shortly after, but this is officially a Disney production, yes.
So you kind of feel like Disney's not going to let that happen to them. We're not going to go super dark like Black Cauldron or something levels.
Yeah, they're never going to go that far again.
And so, that would have been a bold move to like cast them into the fire and then roll credits, right? I'm sure that wouldn't have happened like that, but you're watching them happen, and I think more than anything, though, it does achieve it in the story where you're just kind of like seeing them accept their fate and know that they're with each other, and I think that's the part that's meant to really resonate with you.
Yeah, and that is the arc of the whole not wanting to be lost because they have found themselves. Like that is the trilogy right there. Right, and so that is ultimately, like, I think Toy Story 3 does the best of balancing out like the super fun toy things with a more, it's the first one of all of them that I think feels like it wasn't made on an Apple II computer, like, and I don't mean that in terms of like the rendering software. I just mean in terms of like the Toy Story 2 still feels like they took the Lego city setup, like they put the roads down and they did, like, it feels small, and this is the first time that it actually feels big, and a lot of that is because of the lighting and the shading. It makes it feel a little more
the children's
real.
Playrooms all feel really big. Like I know exactly, I get exactly what
There's
you're saying.
There's a scale to it that like it just feels like a different era, and of course, I mean, it is because it was 11 years after the last movie, but like it's just one of these things where like everything was running in all gears, and they managed to actually pull off a story that like hits all of the notes of a more modern movie for the first time. And I think that all of these things came together to make it feel more successful, to make it feel more satisfying, just in general. And like a lot of the like there's some scary stuff in this that like the scary stuff in the first movie is scary, but like in a kid's scary way. Like the Sid's toys, like he takes his sister's toys and stuff and mixes them together and whatnot, and that's scary in a kidsy way. Right. But there's like the monkey in Toy Story 3 is like genuinely like there's a VHS tape that it reminds me of. There's a movie called Monkey Shines.
Monkey Shines, yeah. And I was gonna say, it probably reminds you of that.
It very specifically is a reference to that, which is like not a kid's thing. And sure, they do these visual references to horror movies all the time. Like in the first movie in Sid's house, it's the it is the Shining carpet.
The Shining, the Shining carpet,
like,
right?
Every cartoon thing kind of does
like
that
the wallpaper.
Too. But yeah,
oh my God.
I just think overall it's a more well-rounded movie than what we got out of the first two.
Speaking of like things that just kind of blew my mind, so a couple, like I think the week before last, I was streaming and I was playing with these two folks, and we were talking about Toy Story 3. And naturally Lotso came up, and they're like, "Oh, who plays Lotso?" And it's Ned Beatty, and Deliverance and all that kind of stuff.
R.I.P.
And so then R.I.P. again. And so then I go and I look up Lotso, the character, and then if you scroll down on the wiki, and it'll say who the character's based on, meaning like who they took inspiration from to create this character.
It's partly Care Bears, but it's also another
Well, it's partly Care Bears. But the character itself, not the style of what it should look like. The character is based on Benito Mussolini.
Yeah.
Which was like, what? Are you kidding me? An Italian fascist dictator? What?
He is that though.
He is all of those things. You watch it happen.
He's a charismatic, pretends to be your friend kind of guy until he turns into a strong arm guy. And that's like not just Mussolini. We have been experiencing that a lot here in America.
Get that a lot anyway. But I just thought like that was just so insane to me, because it's like historically famous like figure.
Yeah.
And yet this character in a purported family movie was like based on him. And obviously what you've said is correct. He smells like strawberries. I mean, it just was it was too funny to me that that's where they took inspiration from, and it's obviously true. When you start to look at some of the things that he did, like especially that approach.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just so funny.
He's literally like breaking limbs.
It's wild. And so
they throw all of the characters into jail. Like they throw all of these characters who don't want to follow suit into granted it's little like baskets for them, but like it is prison. He's Gestapoing them. So
Oh my god! But I liked the movie. I thought it was fun. Like I said, they introduced more people like Ned Beatty. I think like Timothy Dalton is also in this one, and wasn't in any of the other ones because he plays the porcupine doll.
He's in 4.
I thought he was in 3 too because he's in Bonnie's room.
I mean, he's also in 4. He wasn't in the previous
he's also
ones.
In 4.
He's also in 4.
Yeah.
He's one of Bonnie's toys.
Yeah. Is this also where we get what's her name from Flight of the Conchords?
Yes.
Kristen Schaal.
Yes.
Kristen Schaal is also in this.
I forget the character's name, but she is a Triceratops.
Or Triceratops. Yeah.
So all of those are Bonnie's toys that Woody meets when he gets taken from
manages to get out. Yeah.
The daycare. Yeah.
And so, I mean, I feel like, I think after watching the first 2, I was like, I think they could have stopped here. And then you watch the third one, and you're like, okay, this is a more complete trilogy now. Like this does feel like they've really kind of hit all the important notes. They've especially with the end of just like you said, like them finally accepting that like they have each other and that's like where they need to be. I think that's kind of actually completes the arc of this whole theme for that movie. And I honestly think, like you were saying too, like to touch on like how much, I know it was 12 years, but how different the animation is between 2 and 3. Let alone 1 and 2 is like pretty profound. 2 and 3 is like insane, like how different it looks now. And when you look back, because this is also the one that starts off with the prologue that's set in the past of them kind of enacting one of Andy's fantasies, right? Like of him playing with the toys and like what Andy saw, quote, or so to speak, when he was playing with the toys and what the toys maybe experienced themselves when they were playing with it.
Because the second one was the video game fantasy, where it was Rex trying to play the Buzz Lightyear video game, and then this one was actually reenacting the end of not the end of the first movie. Like they're doing the thing from
Potato
the
Head
earlier
being
movies
like
with
a villain and all that kind of stuff.
Then the evil Dr. Porkchop or whatever.
Evil Dr. Porkchop.
But yeah, they're actually bringing that to life, and that looks like it is its own movie. Like it's like that fantasy sequence is better than most movies that I think we see, visually speaking. Like it's laid out really well. It's actually a very exciting action sequence, and it's
and just a quick side note too. Laurie Metcalf plays the mom, right, in all of these movies. Okay, that is her. Because she's awesome anyway. So it's fun to see her
amazing in everything. But we also don't see her face until this one.
That's true. Yeah. You just see, it's like they do the Peanuts gang thing of just showing them above a certain height.
I think, well, not even that. I think they needed to limit how many humans they put into this because they knew they looked bad originally.
Yeah, probably.
They could do like cartoon characters, but they couldn't really do humans early on. So the first 2 movies, they keep it to pretty much Andy and Sid. Like that's kind of it. But yeah, like the other thing we didn't even talk about is just like the layers in this movie. Like I would say Toy Story 2 still has more layers than 1, but it's still pretty minimal in its like it's more of like a 2-layer movie instead of a single-layer movie. Toy Story 3 actually has multiple layers where like side characters do really mean something. Like, and I don't mean like side characters like Jessie. I consider her still like in the second movie, she pretty immediately became a main character. Like that was how that worked.
For sure.
But like Toy Story 3, like Ken and Barbie are just such a good part of this movie that like they made us care about that sort of that throwaway character that is one of the licensed toys, which usually doesn't get to shine in these movies. It is usually like one of the made up ones because they don't want to pay for the screen time for a licensed thing for the most part. And for like, honestly, the licensed stuff I think we mostly got was like Etch-a-Sketch and like the Fisher Price phone. And like,
and when you're a kid watching those movies, you're kind of like, hey, I had one of those. That's really cool. And then you skip ahead and you don't see kind of any other toys that maybe you would have played with growing up, like featured in the movies. But then in Toy Story 3, like you were saying, Barbie and Ken, and other spots too. But then I almost forgot to mention Michael Keaton playing Ken. that's insane to me. Like, I'll watch this with kids.
Barbie is Jodie Benson, who was Ariel in The Little Mermaid. Like, it's
wow,
there's a
I didn't know
lot
that.
of there's a lot of actual like lineage with the characters, the side characters that they bring in this movie. They didn't just like have random who's it's playing them for voices.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, it's wild to me too, because like Michael Keaton is so iconic to me for all of these adult roles that he's had in his career.
Mr.
And
Mom,
so you put him in a
for
Mr. Mom, Beetlejuice,
Multiplicity.
Multiplicity. Oh no!
I'm just gonna choose all of like the B tier ones.
Yeah, the B tier. So I'm a huge Michael Keaton fan.
Spotlight.
And I think he like immediately Spotlight. I mean, come on, like that.
That's not a B tier movie. I'm just trying to think of non like kids or like genre stuff.
Yeah. Well, I feel like he immediately is able to kind of elevate a lot of movies that he's in, and he plays Ken out of Barbie and Ken fame. You know, so it's kind of wild to me.
Well, and that's the thing is he was a comedic actor, but also a stand-up before he was an actor.
Yes,
like,
yes.
So everyone always thinks of him as like, you know, the Batman stuff and whatnot, but or like super serious stuff like Spotlight. But this was a nice thing to actually have him come back and do like a pretty straight comedic role, because it is like. Just joke. And yeah, there's moments where the character like has an emotional like moment and whatnot, but that's not mostly because of Keaton's acting. That's mostly because of the animation. It's like in a pause moment where he's not talking, he'll show like emotion in his face. But yeah, the fact that they managed to do what with this movie, like, and I say this as we go into the fourth movie as a defender of the fourth movie, and we'll get into why. I do that, but this is admittedly the perfect ending to a trilogy.
Yeah,
it is.
They wrapped it up.
It is a bow wrapped trilogy that, like, yes, we don't ever need to revisit Toy Story again, but they left some loose ends in this that they were able to explore with like Bo Peep. And so in 4, while yes, and I am whenever somebody says we don't need this, it's an unnecessary movie, I'm of the mind of saying like no movie is necessary.
Yeah.
That's just how it is. Like, it's a franchise. If they're gonna make it go on, they make it go on. As long as they keep making them good, that's all that matters. So like, I don't need. And we talked about this a little bit before turning on the cameras, but like, I don't need every Pixar movie to be the new standard. I just need it to be entertaining enough and like have a little bit of that emotional punch that they're known for, and I'm satisfied. Especially when it's a movie that is as short as the fourth movie. It is, I believe, the shortest one. And it is very to the point and doesn't overstay its welcome, but it still manages to cover the existential crisis stuff in a very funny way this time, with Forky. And it's just one of these things where I'm like, yeah, we like, if this didn't exist, it'd be fine because we have that trilogy. But I like that this movie covers a new angle of that existential finding yourself story that the rest of them do, where this is about not the toys being okay without Andy anymore. This is literally about Woody finding happiness for himself and not about finding happiness in making a child happy. And that is where I'm like, that's a lesson that everybody needs. And it's not like you obviously want to make a kid happy, but I'm saying it in a more grand, don't do things for other people before yourself. Like, you need to take care of yourself kind of thing. And I think that's a good thing to actually show. And this is a very approachable way to show that, because it is a story that speaks to children first. So it is one of those things where I'm like, man, you just got to find what's happy for you. And there you have it. And I think that this movie does that very, very well in a really entertaining way. Again, did it need to get made? Probably not, because we have a perfect trilogy. But I'm super satisfied going back to it. And that leap that we keep talking about from movie to movie, technology wise, this movie is unbelievably gorgeous. The way that they handle lighting and literally, and not even just lighting a scene, but like actual lighting objects, like bulbs. The way that that stuff is shown on screen is unbelievably gorgeous. And I love every movie that Pixar has put out since Toy Story 4. Like Onward is amazing. Like we'll get to it. I very much enjoy Lightyear for what it is. But like none of those I think look as good as this movie, which is crazy.
There's like I guess you could say a warmth to the way that a lot of the scenes are lit in this movie that you don't really get in the other ones at all. Especially some of the night scenes or the scenes when they're in the camper van with Holly, I think is the little girl's name.
Bonnie.
Yes. And so you kind of see the lighting in those scenes really kind of blew my mind. And even when they're in the antique store, like the lighting is really amazing. It's when they're outside, the lighting is amazing.
It's familiar incandescent lighting.
Yeah.
And
they nailed it.
That is where it makes you feel like you've been in the room before. Because like when you have stark kind of bluish tint lighting going on, or like LED replicant lighting on a digital side, like it gives it a little bit of unnatural feeling to it, and that's totally fine to light a scene with. It's whatever, but like you're trying to make toys feel alive. Like it helps to have lighting that actually makes a room feel like you have been inside of it before. And all of these things, antique stores, a small town carnival, a camper, or some sort of like even hotel room, like you could say could substitute in for it. Most people have experienced these things. And so to be able to relay that feeling of, it's a nostalgic feeling of like walking in to one of these environments, is how it hammers home a lot of what it's doing subconsciously without like beating you over the head over it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's honestly the best looking movie in the series because of that, because of probably the additional innovations they can make, with every passing year. And maybe they're not setting the new standard with like a story or something like that, but they certainly are kind of setting the new standard with every movie they make, it seems, with like the technology that they're able to put into the movies and the way that they're able to, bring that like lighting and color and the animation frames that they're able to do. First, when you compare this movie to the fourth movie, the action sequences that they're able to achieve in this fourth movie are insane by comparison.
Yeah.
The chase through the antique store, the kind of scenes in the underneath, I don't even know what those things are called, in playgrounds that like they've kind of set up shop, that Bo Peep has set up shop in. It's crazy. Like some of the like different sequences they've managed to put together. The fact that it is are Key and Peele in this too, right? Like in number 4?
Yes. They are
they're the
Bunny and
two
Ducky.
stuffed animals from the carnival. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
The like intentionally great bad design. They look like generic.
I know exactly
toys.
what those carnival toys look like.
Exactly, yeah. But then it all like those generic designs also lend themselves to being like, when they do like the fantasy sequences of them like coming up with a plan, like it lends itself to that like creepy eye kind of like they become kaiju and start shooting lasers and stuff. Like it's unbelievably perfect with those designs because their eyes are just like this big all the time.
Yeah. Oh, God. I mean, and again, you have like comedic actor. You have Keanu Reeves.
Yep.
You bring back Annie Potts and make her like a main character. Christina Hendricks.
That's the thing is, Bo Peep in this movie is, like you could say it's a different character because it is like a grown character. There was character growth off screen, but like Bo Peep in this movie is one of my favorite characters in the whole franchise, disregarding like even who she was in the first couple of movies, because like it's a fine side character and like pseudo romantic, like it's obviously a romantic interest, but like they never played it that heavily as a romantic interest in the first two movies outside of like
hooking Woody around the neck and stuff and pulling him over for a second. But there's an actual like chemistry between the characters, and she's just like a self-sufficient, fully fleshed out character at this point. Whereas before, and I think this is a problem with, not a problem, but like an issue with these movies 1 through 3, where it's like they were never fully fleshed out characters. None of them were, because they were always codependent on Andy or Bonnie or whatever. And so once they break themselves free, at least with Woody and Bo Peep, particularly with Bo Peep, she is that self-sufficient character that is fully fleshed out. That could be like, I could have watched a movie with just this version of Bo Peep fully. Like, if it was just the misadventures of her and I forget the name of the police officer, like the Polly Pocket style. I would be totally satisfied. That would have been totally cool with me. So like the fact that
she's got like this post-apocalyptic toy attire on, like the new version of Bo Peep has got like armbands and like a makeshift kind of
the skunk is a Mad Max car basically. Like it's fantastic. I adore this like era of this character, and I don't want to say like I wish we get Toy Story 5 for like whatever reason, but like I would love to see more like a short, like we got Lamplight with which is one of the shorts, which is also stunningly beautiful, because it is like one of the quiet moments that is one of the most beautiful moments is just Bo Peep and Woody looking at the chandeliers in the antique shop, and it's think of that scene and it's just like 6 minutes of that. It's fantastic.
Right.
And so I would be totally fine if we got another, like how we're getting the I Am Groot series of shorts. Like if we just got another series of shorts with following Bo Peep that was like leading up to Toy Story 4, I would be so happy. I would love that.
That would be a fun story to tell. That would be a fun story to tell. But yeah, and again, this like, this movie kind of tries to, like, if the first 3 movies are about being left behind and then kind of accepting it, like you were saying, like this movie is about kind of like once you've accepted that you're left behind, it's about kind of it's even deeper, like part of like self-actualization of like, okay, then what is my life meant to be then? And once
who am I without the group that was also left behind?
Yeah, and part of it too,
that was about like the group finding self-actualization. This is about Woody finding
yeah. And there's another side of it too that I started to see as a dad, which is just like Woody kind of feeling like he has this kind of paternal relationship, with a lot of the kind of toys, and even with the kid, Andy, and him kind of seeing everybody move on from that. Like Andy literally goes to college, which is when most parents kind of have empty nest syndrome. They and seeing Woody kind of start to personify some of that too, and kind of becoming okay with like what he did in his life and kind of maybe settling down. That's kind of how I looked at it. Like he's like this. So it's a weird kind of even equally sad moment at the end of the movie, even though it's very uplifting, because he's like accepting like, well, this is what the rest, like these are the days, that are going to be going forward. I'm going to be here, and everybody's moved on from me, and that's okay. And
years now.
Yeah, that's what
he's retiring.
It's setting up.
Yeah.
It's kind of wild.
That's what's cool about like the perspective of the fact that specifically our age group has grown up with these movies, because like, yes, anyone that came after us grew up with these movies because they were able to watch them at home, whatever. But like, from start to finish, we were the age when they started, and now we are getting to that age of like, not necessarily retirement, but like we're getting to that.
Like, some people are having I'm sure a lot of people have families, they have kids that they can start to see this through. Some people had kids a lot sooner than me, and starting to see these things come through as well.
I think we're just at an age now where we started as Andy's age, and we are now at the point of like adulthood maturity stuff, which is like, I mean, obviously I'm not that mature. I still have all this shit behind me, but like where we can recognize these two. Well, yours is rated M. But you have Destiny stuff. I have Steamboat Willie right here.
That's true.
And I have and then a Kirby right here. But yeah, we're just at an age where we can recognize like themes of what matters. Like, that's ultimately what I'm saying that we can relate to. Is it's not like specifically retirement or even like the empty nest syndrome. It's like, no, we recognize that like we can have that separation anxiety and like recognize it and move forward from it. And that's where the emotional impact can come through from a different perspective now, because this is a more, I don't want to say mature storyline, but like it's a more mature version of a like, I don't know. I don't even know how to explain it. Like, it is just an adult storyline of like, you don't kind of have this perspective in your late teens and early 20s. Right? You don't have that stuff where it's like, I'm finding out what really matters. And it doesn't like, I mean, some people obviously do, like they go through extreme hardships throughout their childhood or their teenage years or whatever. But I'm just saying on a general perspective, like, you have grown a family in your 30s. I had like severe family emergency health stuff in my 30s. So like, this is sort of that time of our life where we kind of start to pick up on that stuff a little bit more, where I think if this movie came out when Toy Story 3 came out, we would have just been like, oh, that was a cool movie, and it was an emotional movie, I guess, but like not connect to it as much. Whereas like I think Toy Story 3 is a much more universal thing that people can connect to, because it is that recognition of like saying goodbye. And that's just I think a less niche way to have to like deal with an emotional thing. Everyone gets that at some point. So it's I think this is probably the most fascinating movie of the four for that reason. Even though it may not be the one that like hits the hardest emotionally or is the most groundbreaking or whatever. I think it's the most interesting on that standpoint.
Yeah, and if you probably, one thing that I always try to remember to do in situations like this where you can follow multiple movies is like looking at the people who helped make them and create them. And if they've kind of scaled up from like 1 through 4, like those people are probably also going through similar emotions or feelings that are then reflected in the movie. And I have to think that that's a part of it, right? Like the idea that like I'm now facing kind of like the golden years, so to speak, like you said. I'm now kind of looking down the barrel of like my kids have kind of moved on with their lives. They're having their own internal lives now that are maybe kind of independent of me, and I get to be on the periphery of them. Which hits a lot differently when you're a parent and you try to like imagine what that future looks like. You know, it's insane to think about of this kind of relationship you have. And so I think of that also in context of like the people that made this movie, kind of also growing with those stories and the stories they choose to tell and those evolving as well. And so I feel that a lot of what we see thematically come through that we've already talked about is probably a big extension of like what the creative folks who wrote and directed this movie were probably also going through too.
Yeah, and that's the thing is Toy Story 4 was Andrew Stanton, who was there since the first movie. Like it's it you definitely have that sort of through line that comes with like here, you know, I'm sure there were a ton of people that had their hands on most of, if not all the movies, but like in a situation like his, where he is actually writing the screenplay on all of them and is on, did he co-direct 3? I don't know, but like it's for him, I think that is the story that he's trying to convey, is his story with Toy Story. And if they come back and do Toy Story 5, if he is not involved, I think that would put the pin in that specifically of like this movie is him saying goodbye to that franchise. So he's
moving on. It like, you know, and animated films are such an interesting way to explore those kind of themes, because especially your first take on them is like a family film, and so you don't necessarily think to connect with these like very heady adult themes like that in it. I think the best example of that is the French film The Illusionist. Not the live action, obviously, with Edward Norton, but I think I can't say the actual French word.
Actually, The Prestige is what we're
But I feel like have you seen The Illusionist?
Yes.
There's no dialogue. It's all okay. And so like that was like very much like a 1-to-1 kind of telling of like I think this guy who has since passed away, just trying to apologize to his daughter when I read the kind of breakdown of that movie. And so when you start to recognize that like, oh, you can do this in animated films. Like I had watched that and didn't necessarily connect with that theme right away because I saw it a million years ago. And then you read about it and you're like, oh, wow, that is true. It's like so obvious that when you read the breakdown of what he was doing. And so I started to look at like other animated films in this way of just like, well, the person who made it obviously has a lot of authorship and agency over the creative decisions and the story they decide to tell. And so, of course, they're going to want to make it personal for them. You know, that's part of what we get by having a director. You know, that it's partly their vision and their story they want to tell. So
yeah, and it's
I think that
what's even more interesting about that too is with animation, most of the time you have co-directors too. Like so to find
a lot of the time you're
personal story that comes through, because it'll usually be like the story director and the tech director kind of working together. So. For them to find common ground and work through, you know, what does this mean as a personal story, as like a conglomerate of people. And I think that that's actually like, that is one of the really interesting things about animation, is the fact that like you don't often get that with movies that are live action, because it is usually because of a director's guild situation. It's usually one director. Granted, there are other non single directed movies. There's, you know, and this happens with action movies a lot, because it'll be like a director and the sort of choreography director like being co-directors on it, but it's not quite the same situation as like with an animated film where you're bringing in themes that aren't just like punch punch shoot shoot, right? So it's I have always even in those years of where, you know, where we talked about like you don't admit to liking Disney movies, as it's particularly as like a teenage boy, because we grew up in a toxic culture that told us not to admit to that shit. Particularly in the Northeast, where it's like, no, it's cold, be a man. Like it's that kind of shit. But like it's such a fascinating format of storytelling for that reason, because it is like there's so much artistry beyond what you're just seeing on screen, because like typically when you're seeing stuff on screen in a live action movie, you are seeing what's caught in camera, and this, you know, I'm not dissing on like CG like stunt extravaganza stuff with this. I'm just saying it's a different kind of art than what you get with animation. It's with animation, you are seeing somebody's work frame by frame, telling a narrative story versus like action beats telling a story. So it's just like, it's a lot more subtle than that kind of art form. I want to be careful not to like insult other like an effects artist versus an animator. So it's just I find it a little more fascinating to watch somebody tell a story frame by frame like that. So
I mean, ultimately, like my first kind of like blush at it probably was that kind of cynical reaction of just like, do they really need to make this movie? I felt like the third one really kind of wrapped up the story so well. And so I'm glad I got the opportunity to watch it and doing this with you, because then I was like, oh, that was a good movie. You know, like I think like, you know, it doesn't necessarily, you know, it's not the best Pixar movie I've ever seen, right? Like you were kind of saying, but it tells some really interesting stories. It has some really interesting like themes represented in it. You get to kind of, I think, wrap up Woody's story. I think it would be really hard to try to bring, you know, that character back again for like another story. Like, how do you explore that? That character's done everything at this point. You know, like how do you get at more?
It would have to be shorts with him and Bo Peep. Like that's the only way you can do it. You can't do a full length movie anymore with Woody. Personally. I think it would be like narratively impossible. If like, they can find a way, I'm happy to watch it. Sure. It's the same thing with it. Like, I'm not going to say no to it, and I will be happy if it's good. But like, it's one of those things where it's like, it seems harder to figure out a way to do it after this movie versus 3 because there were those loose ends of like Bo Peep not being in 3.
Just wait for the remake of Toy Story 1 where they build it from the ground up and
it will be
they
live
re-release
action
it
instead though.
It'll be live action. Yeah.
It will
Imagine.
It will be Timothée Chalamet as Woody. And probably
Chris Evans as Buzz Lightyear. Just get him in there.
As
get Seth Rogen in there. He'll play one of the other supporting characters, sure. Oh man, but yeah, I think these are really fun movies. I think that they're really good family movies. I'm glad that none of them, like you had kind of pointed out, like none of them really overstay their welcome with their run times. They get in and out, and they tell an efficient story, sometimes more than others. And it'll be interesting to kind of see how I think the one of the best takeaways that you've pointed out is just how storytelling has evolved through movies 1 through 4, and the way that they've decided to approach and take on different themes through movies 1 and 4 and explore those themes that are sometimes, like, I feel like won't necessarily reach all the people that they wanted to, but I don't really think that they care to some degree too, like especially with number 4. I think that that's really awesome that they got the opportunity to make the movie and tell the stories they did. And it does continues to make me excited to see additional Pixar movies, in the future. Knowing that they are going to try to take swings at some of these kind of headier kind of topics and themes like they have been with even through Toy Story.
And sometimes they will just make a pretty straightforward sci-fi adventure movie. Which we're going to
be talking about soon.
Which is what we will be talking about in the next episode. And I will wrap it up here. I think that's a good place to wrap up. So nice. We are going to be back. You will be back joining me to talk about Lightyear. And what it hits, what it misses. Overall, I think it's a decent, solid movie. But who am I to make the call for everyone? You are Mikey. Yeah, I rule all. But thanks for coming back on again, man.
Of course, I love it. Thank you so much for having me.
Now we got Lightyear, but now we gotta all right, Legends of Vox Machina season 2. Give me a date.
Oh my god. Yeah, I know. Give us a date.
Yeah, cause I need that back real bad.
I know, me too.
But until really just a couple days from now, there's no watch here. But we will be back with Lightyear in a matter of days. So join us then, and until next time, bye.
Bye.